Right then, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to your childhood. How did you get into science fiction and fantasy, and what kind of stuff were you reading when you were a kid?
Oh, the origin story.
Always worth knowing.
Oh, always that one where you get bitten by a radioactive spider in the library. That one, yeah.
Yes, and then you just start shooting webs out your bum, things like that.
Yeah, sadly that didn't happen for me. Mine was kind of much more normal, to be honest. I mean, my first kind of memories of like fantasy and literature and writing were the Brian Jacks books, the Red War series.
Okay.
Which, for anyone that hasn't heard of them, they're fantastic children's fantasy books, and they're all centered around animals who are warriors and monks and healers and things like that. And yeah, like for me, that was my first real kind of fantasy experience with books. I mean, I read the traditional ones, the Lord of the Rings, the Narnia books, things like that. But that was probably the one that got me into the genre the most. I mean, in terms of my origins, I would say that the biggest impact any book had on me at that age was, I don't know if you've heard of the Depth of Mice trilogy by Robin Jarvis.
I haven't, no, tell me about it.
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic. It is the bleakest, most miserable children's book you will ever come across.
Wow, okay.
In your life. And I absolutely loved it. It was the first time as a young person I remember coming across any fantasy author that kind of touched on the subjects that I was interested in, so like the bleaker, darker fantasy. He wrote a book called The Alchemist's Cat, which it actually was part of a different trilogy that he did, not The Depth of Mice. But that book was like, I read it so many times as a child. It was falling apart at the seams, like all the pages were like faded. But I remember reading it, and, you know, the themes that he was touching on in this book were things like, you know, there was the Black Death, so the plague, and there was murder, and there was, you know, families being separated and things. But they were all done in such a kind of clear, easy to understand, honest way that I absolutely became obsessed with these books. They're fantastic, and they really kind of influenced what I did afterwards. So that was a big one. And then, of course, Terry Pratchett.
All right. Okay. Yeah. He, despite him being so powerful, he hasn't kind of come up that often in influences.
Oh, really?
I mean, a lot of people say, oh, I read him later on and stuff. And it's like the humor aspect of fantasy was very much his corner. So you couldn't try and tackle it. But yeah. Some people have mentioned him, but not a lot. It's interesting.
See, I mean, I wasn't a big reader, to be honest, when I was younger. I did read in kind of fits and starts, but for a lot of the time I was a drama club kid,
right?
So I was doing kind of lots of like stage plays and script writing and reading and things like that. And I remember we did a production of Guards by Terry Pratchett, and that was kind of my first introduction to Pratchett's way of, you know, looking at characters and building worlds and things like that. And I had so much fun with it that I just picked up the books after that, and I think I read the entire series within about a year.
Friends of mine, this is going back a long time before he was, you know, Terry Pratchett. They said, can we get the rights to the Witches to do this thing at like the Edinburgh? It wasn't a Fringe, it was Edinburgh sort of stage show or something, a very small production. And he said, yes, as long as I can have 2 tickets. And they were like, yes, of course. And so they did a production of The Witches, and he came up, she came up, and they cooked him dinner beforehand, and he went to the show, and he was so nice. He was just so
fantastic.
Nice. But yeah, he couldn't do that these days. Get the rights to, you know, someone that big to do a stage show.
No, I mean, to be honest, I was surprised at the time that, you know, we were able to do a play. When we did that, and then we did Men at Arms the following year. You know, both of which were great fun. But like you say, you wouldn't do it now. Like there'd be no chance.
I guess back then it was slightly different. It wasn't quite the same now with rights and translations, and you didn't have TV shows and films of this stuff. It just wasn't done.
Yeah,
fantasy was just a bit of a dirty word, you know.
Exactly. Not anymore.
No, things have changed quite a lot now. So when did you think about becoming a writer and start writing your own stories? Were you doing that as a kid, or was it later on?
I wrote a little bit as a kid. I mean, I would, you know, enter into the competitions that the schools do, and, you know, they send off all the stories, and every child wins, no matter, you know, how good or bad the story is, that kind of thing. I didn't have the best experiences early on with writing, and especially the people that kind of were encouraging me to write. I had a few teachers who they kind of recognised that it was something that I could potentially do, and they were very keen for me to follow it up. Unfortunately, they were very much of the mindset that because I was a girl, that I would have to write in certain genres, and they kind of really tried to box me in, which, you know, is just not what you want to hear as a young aspiring writer. So, and for me, I always wanted to write the darker, like the grim dark fantasy. I didn't want to write the fluffy stuff, and I kind of just thought, if this is all I can do, then it's not for me. And I put it down, and I didn't come back to it for several years. But thankfully, at some point, I came back to it. I don't think there was a particular moment where I thought, oh, I'm going to write. But I remember writing a lot of like sketches, like comedy sketches. Like as a teenager, which I doubt anyone would find funny. They're the kind of things that 12, 13-year-olds would find funny. But I know that me and my sister used to drive my parents insane, because we used to steal the video camera, and we would write out these sketch shows and these comedies, and we would film them. And they were, you know, they were awful, but they were good fun. So yeah, it kind of went from there, and then I went into blogging a couple of years later.
Mm-hmm.
Then I took another big break, and then back to the blogging again a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's been fits and starts.
So when did you sit down to write your first novel? Was there a trigger? Or was it just something you thought, you know, one day I'm gonna have a go. I'm gonna have a go at this?
Oh, there was definitely a trigger.
Okay.
Basically, I'd always wanted to write a novel. I'd started several and got, like, you know, a couple of chapters in, and then I'd kind of run out of steam and realised it wasn't going anywhere. And I didn't think that I could actually finish one. So I'd kind of put it to the back of my mind. And I was in a job at the time, which was a really high stress job. I wasn't enjoying it, and I ended up getting fired. So clearly I wasn't very good at it either. But when I started looking for a new job, I kind of had this realization that I'd spent like the last several years doing like really kind of stressful, difficult jobs that I really didn't like. And I'd suddenly had nothing to do with my time. And I was like, do you know what? This is the time. So yeah, I sat down and I started writing my first novel. And I wrote it in 6 weeks. Literally just sat at my kitchen, at the laptop for 12, 13 hours a day. And just by the end, like, I didn't have fingers left. It was just stumps where my fingers had been.
Mash keyboard.
It was absolutely at that stage by the end. You know, my family didn't see me for, you know, about a month. So I forgot what sunlight looked like. But it was great. It was so cathartic. And after I'd done that, I realised that this is what I wanted to do, and there was no going back. And I was like, that's it, not getting another job now.
And that wasn't We Men, was it? That first book?
No.
Okay.
It was, I wrote a trilogy before I did We Men.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like epic swords and sorcery fantasy with just loads of delicious tropes like mixed in there. It was absolutely the stories I loved reading when I was younger, but
yeah,
I put that one on the shelf for the time being, and then worked on We Men instead.
So you didn't try and, you know, either self-publish it or try and get it traditionally published, the trilogy?
I put out a few feelers kind of tentatively. I mean, at that point I wasn't hugely like compelled to publish. At that point I was still trying to figure myself out as a writer and what I wanted to do. But you know, I sent it out to a few people, and I got some feedback from some different writers and some agents. And you know, some of it was positive, some of it was, you know, not so positive, but a lot of it basically just said, look, the market is really saturated with this kind of thing at the moment.
Right.
You know, without a name behind you, without a following behind you, then chances are it's not going to be picked up. Maybe come back to us with something else in the future. So, you know, there's always that pin still in that I could go back to, hopefully.
Yeah, maybe. So given what you said about, you know, starting books and then redoing, we had a question from a gentleman you may know called RJ Bailey, who said, what advice would you have for someone who's writing their first novel now that you've written a few and completed a few?
I would say that most of the advice I would give to people who want to write their first book is probably not around writing, purely because I don't trust myself to give good advice, let's be honest. But I think in terms of what you can do to really help is just engage with as much stuff as you can, like people, places, what's going on around in the world, what's been happening, and just try and experience as many things as possible. Because when I kind of first started writing years and years ago, I was so naive to so many things. And I think the more you can expose yourself to, the better it's going to make you. And, I always feel like as writers, we take in a hell of a lot more than we put out. Yep. So, through the process of you writing one book, but in that process, you're looking at, people, their histories, their characters, their emotions, places they've been, architecture, world building. So the more you can fill your life with that in real life, the more it's going to help you as a writer. So that would probably be my first bit of advice.
I think you're right. I think people say, where do you get your ideas? And it's one of the worst questions to ask a writer in some way, because the answer is annoyingly simple and yet obvious, and it's everywhere and it's everything. Yeah. It's everything you see and touch and taste and feel in every TV show and every book and every conversation, every person in the street, and it all feeds in. But that's not really a satisfying answer, but it is the truth, as you say. Yeah. We take it all in, we filter it through our brain, it comes out somehow, and it's not. People say, is it ever based on a particular person that you've met? And my answer is always no, because it's not. I mean, have you based any of your characters on people, or is it just aspects of things?
Oh yeah, it's just an amalgamation of people that I've met or that I've seen in different, movies, TV shows, on the news. It's just, little tiny flecks of different things that you put all together. I think the more you can kind of absorb, the better. I think I've probably researched and forgotten more things in the process of writing one book than I have in like the rest of my life. So
yeah, it's just, I've got like a book Bible for most of my books, and there's more stuff in there that never goes on the page. There's detail. I mean, do you plan your stories, or do you make them up as you go along? Are you a pantser or a plotter? Where do you fall on the spectrum?
I refer to myself as a wild renegade pantser.
Okay. Tell me more.
I was talking to a couple of other writers earlier on today, actually, and I was talking about, processes and like how we approach things. And I just said, I am Tinsley, the bringer of chaos. Like, it's so difficult for me to sit and talk about process because, I am a pantser. I do try as much as I can to plan things out. I have not so much a book Bible, as I think I referred to it the day as book post-it notes, where I have several different documents on my laptop, which one is facial scars, one is outfits, one is places people have been. So at some point eventually I like to think that I would put all these things together into one kind of serviceable document, but that hasn't happened yet. So the only thing that I have that could be vaguely described as a plotter-ish document is I have something called the death sheet.
Right.
Which is basically the time, dates, methods of death for all my characters. So yes, that's pretty much the only part that is preordained.
So you do some planning, where it's going, how it's going to end before you start, get 50,000 words and then go, oh, what now? What,
Yeah,
you've got something in mind.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say it's a rough outline. It's kind of a pencil sketch like outline. So I know the arcs of the characters are going to follow. I know where I want them to end up at the end of kind of each book. But, other than that, even if I make plans, I very rarely will stick to them. So, it's just whatever comes out, really.
Yeah, it's a moving target. It doesn't have to be the thing that you've set down.
Yeah, that's it.
I think people get hung up on that as well. Even people who think they need to plan the stories, they think, well, now I'm locked in. I'm like, well, it's your story. You can change it. If you're not happy with it, you don't have to stick to that plan. It's slightly different if you pitch a story to a publisher and then you give them something completely different. But most of the time, you're okay, you know, if it's somewhere within the same ballpark.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think there's definitely advantages to both, you know, whether you are a plotter or a pantser. And I think some people kind of move between the two as well. So, you know, just because you start as one doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, you will still be a pantser in your next book. You might be, you know, might be a plotter for the next one.
Yeah. It's that thing of, I think it's a spectrum. I think it's not all one thing or the other. And you move up and down depending on the project, depending upon what's going on in your life, you know, what's going on in the world. It just completely, you know, it changes. Like, you know, how have you found writing during the last 18 months? Have you struggled with it? Has it made any difference? Some people I know just kind of ground to a halt, and others have just got the head down and just carried on.
For the most part, I would say it's actually been really good for me, because I mean, I spend a lot of time at home anyway. So, you know, kind of the last 2 years haven't really impacted me that much. I've been very fortunate in that way. So, you know, I can work from home. The job that I do outside of writing, I can do at home. I would say for me, the difficult thing is the not being able to go out and interact with peers, other writers. So, I mean, it's been fantastic because so many people have done things like, you know, starting up podcasts or doing online conventions, things like that. But for someone who was in their kind of first year as a published writer, self-published writer, I feel like I really would have liked to go out and kind of, you know, meet people in person and get that experience of, you know, attending panels and learning more about the craft. So, you know, I've had to learn things either by doing them and getting them right or wrong, or by reading things on the internet, which, you know, with the best of intentions, there's so much advice on the internet. Yeah. And it's so hard as a new writer to figure out, you know, what's still relevant, what's still in the market, you know, what you should be doing. So, yeah, I think that had a big impact on me.
Yeah, finding reliable sources on the internet is difficult.
Yes.
At the best of times, you know, there's so much information, as you say. Finding something you can trust, yeah, that's not easy.
No.
So, We Men of Ash and Shadow, after your fantasy trilogy, you started working on this, and I know you've spoken about some of the influences of this, but for those who haven't seen any of the interviews, can you talk about where some of the building blocks came for this book?
There were a couple of things, really. I mean, I'd written a short story, which is where kind of the We Men of Ash and Shadow and the Vanguard character all were built from. I feel like I talk about this a lot, but there's a BBC show called Luther.
Love it. Idris Elba, Neil Cross.
So I feel like I should get like some sort of like reward or something from the people who made that show, because I just plug it everywhere at the moment. So
film's coming as well, so you know that's all good.
So excited. So, yes, I lost my train of thought.
Sorry, Luther.
I got overexcited thinking about Luther. But there was in one of the seasons, there's a scene where Luther, the character, for those who don't know, Idris Elba plays a kind of slightly not on the level detective, and he meets this young girl, and she's a young kind of prostitute sex worker, and there's these scenes where they're talking and their relationship is just so incredibly dynamic and so unusual that it inspired me to write the scene that became the scene with Carmen and Vanguard in the bathroom. So that kind of where it all stemmed from. In terms of other inspirations, I love the 18th, 19th century history, aesthetics, the kind of literature, and the literature has been inspired by that period. So, you know, you Jack the Rippers and Penny Dreadful and From Hell was like a big influence for me as well. But just that kind of heavy industrial kind of style of world and landscape. I mean, I don't know where you are, but I've spent most of my life kind of in the north, you know, the wild north of the UK, where there's a heavy industrial history there. So, you know, just kind of towns and cities that I've been in or passed through on trains, and you see kind of derelict, dilapidated factories. And I was like, yes, I want to write a book about this. So
I'm from the north, so yeah, I know.
yeah. all the old mines and the mills and like all that kind of thing. Yeah, I wanted to see something like that in fantasy. I've read some great books that do kind of touch on that era, but I would love to see more of it personally.
Yeah, I guess the closest, well, is the steampunk, which is fantasy, but it gets more into more technology, and then you get some books that are creeping into the industrial era, like some of Joe Abercrombie's new ones. Adrian Tchaikovsky's Shadows of the Yap has got like technology creeping in, but and mechanization a little bit and that kind of thing. So how far did you go into the technology side in the world building that you were creating?
I mean, I don't think I went massively far into the technology of it. My interest was kind of more on the economical side of it, the social shifts that happened around that period.
Right.
I mean, it's a huge kind of expansive history, you know, from like pre-industrial to post-industrial, but just kind of the movements that happened during that time, especially in view of, you know, people moving away from everything was very church-based. I mean, obviously there were still very heavy religious influences, but, you know, it became much more about, you know, class divide and about industry and labor and politics. So that side of it really fascinates me, you know, kind of how we went from being this almost like a fiefdom, like, you know, kings and queens and knights, and, you know, maybe that's not particularly realistic to actual history, but in my head, you know, it was that shift from these are the lords and the ladies and these people are on high and we are down low and we are peasants, to actually those two classes really starting to move together and shape what we know as kind of modern, as the modern world.
Yeah, definitely. Things that, yes, because, you know, you look at through ancient history in this country, we're taught it's all about the kings and queens that have ruled the country and how things have changed. So does because I haven't read it, but does religion play any part in the book, given that you said about how it used to be quite, you know, we were a very heavy Christian country in this country in the UK, and now it's changed, but what about religion? Does that feature into the book?
Not especially, no. It's more kind of mentioned in passing. I lean more into the politics of it, and kind of the social economical side of things. So, you know, what are the people in charge doing? What is the administration like, the government? How are these cities run? And, you know, I kind of backed myself into a corner, really, because I made it a lot more complicated than I'd initially planned.
Right.
And now I have to explain it all in the next book, because people keep asking questions about it, which is fantastic. But yeah, has made me have to think about things a little bit more. But yes, I think I did consider putting religion into it, but I think for the kind of book that I wanted to write, I think it kind of would have almost felt like it was a subplot, really. I think kind of the politics are twisty and turny and exciting enough, I hope.
So who are some of the powers that be then within your world that you've created? Are they like industry heads, or are they like labor leaders of unions, or?
Well, when I first started writing it, I don't think I necessarily realised what I was doing in the world. But I mean, I knew what I was doing because I had an idea, but
yeah,
I didn't kind of realise this monster that it would become. And there was a point where, because in the world that I created, all the cities are governed separately. So
right.
You have the kind of cities, and then they have little like vassal states around them, like villages, towns, things like that. And I kind of thought, well, would this actually work if this was in kind of the real world? And I thought, well, actually it did, because you look back at kind of the much earlier in English history, we had things like Sussex, Wessex, Northumbria, like all these kind of fiefdoms, I think is the word, where everything was separate. So really what I've done is I've taken that kind of theory and I've put it into a almost like Victorian type setting. So I drew a lot on that. I drew a little bit from kind of the American system as well. So the cities, they're all kind of self-governed, but there is also this council that is spoiler in the second book. I can let that one slip. That's
Okay.
fine.
Okay.
So we learn a bit more about that. So they kind of have, you know, another element of power as well over kind of what happens in the country. But yeah, it was really interesting to write. I learned a lot from building that world. Probably wouldn't do it again.
I'm saying it sounds quite complicated. Did you spend a lot of time, you know, planning the world then? Because I know you said you're mostly a pantser, but did you spend a lot of time just pondering about the complicated world system before you started writing it?
I did. I mean, I did probably spend like a good few weeks kind of reading up on, like I said, the American system, how England used to be back when we were all kind of these little fiefdoms and things. And I did kind of make notes, and I had like different ideas of how I wanted each city to operate. I mean, the first book is very much contained within the one city, but you know, we're not kind of exposed to any more than that at the time. But I already knew before I started writing the next book, kind of, you know, what the major cities are going to be. So, you know, we've got 6 cities, and in my head I kind of thought, okay, well, this would be the equivalent of London, this would be the equivalent of like Manchester and kind of Birmingham. So, you know, I knew which ones were industrial, which ones were coastal ones, which ones were, you know, more about kind of transport or farming or agriculture. So yeah, there was definitely an element of needing to know before I started writing how these places were going to work.
Yeah, how they all interact with each other and feed the system that creates, you know, society that everyone relies on. Yeah. Sounds interesting. So tell me about the story. Tell people about the story who are watching.
Oh, okay. So I'm trying to get better at this actually, because like most writers,
you don't have to pitch the whole thing, but it's always people give the elevator pitch. And I'm like, I can't. I can tell you about what's going on, you know, but I can't do an elevator pitch. That's awful. I'm not gonna. Don't do that.
Okay. Elevator pitch then. Women of Ash and Shadow. It's a gaslamp grimdark fantasy. It follows a character called John Vanguard through a corrupt, criminally led city where he works as a mercenary. Through the process of doing his job, he meets a young man called Taran, who is an aristocrat who has fallen on hard times, a bit down on his luck. So they start this kind of mentor-mentee relationship, and as they go through the city, Vanguard starts getting embroiled in kind of the political lies and the intrigue and the secrets that are going on, and starts to realise that maybe the city is nudging towards a revolution. And it's really about his journey and how he reacts to where he is. So
he's getting caught up in larger events surrounding him in the city.
Oh yes, he gets caught up in all sorts. So it's I think a couple of people said to me, it's like Gangs of New York meets Peaky Blinders meets Assassin's Creed. is the way that most people have come back to me and said it is. So
yeah, that's good. We had another question saying, what were some of your main inspirations for some of the characters? We've done Vanguard because we touched on that with Idris Elba and Luther, but Sanderson, is that another one? Kosick and Carmen. Someone said, who are your main inspirations for these characters?
I mean, again, I think like we were saying earlier, so much inspiration comes from like just little bits of different characters, people we've met, personalities that we've come across. I mean, I'd say out of all of them, Sanderson was the one who was the most created out of my own mind. I knew that I wanted a kind of a foil character for Vanguard, somebody that he could have like a bit of patter with and some back and forth. And I think, you know, the relationship between them built up before the character did, really. So
right.
There's a scene in the book which I refer to as the soup scene, which obviously I won't spoil if people haven't read it, but that was one of the early scenes that I wrote when I was kind of going through the book, and I wanted to try and encapsulate the camaraderie of two people who are kind of thrown together, who would like otherwise never know each other in a really crappy situation, and kind of how they interact and how they respond to each other, you know. And you see it happen all the time. You see it happen in, you know, the military, and, you know, even just places of work. You know, you're thrown into these situations with people that you otherwise probably wouldn't ever really speak to.
Oh yeah.
And, you know, you just got to make the best of it. And I thought, what would it be like if two people in that situation were just absolutely brutally honest with each other? and just said exactly what they wanted to say, and hence Sanderson came about.
Yes, I find myself biting my tongue many times at work. Things that I can't say to people I want to say because it's not appropriate. I don't really know them outside of work. You don't know them in a social setting. You would never hang out with them, and you're like, and yes, I still have to kind of, be nice to them.
That's it. Yeah, Sanderson doesn't do that. You see, he's complete polar opposite. But I mean, that was a lot of fun to write as well, because I could just kind of be really ridiculous with those two characters together. It was great.
Channel things you'd like to say at work that you can't say yourself.
Yes, absolutely. So no, I wouldn't want to say those things, I don't think. Or maybe.
Well, who can say? Maybe. No spoilers.
Yeah, who was the other one that
Kosick and Carmen?
I mean, Carmen was an interesting one to write, because she probably more than any other character I've ever written has more elements of myself in her.
Okay.
I mean, we're definitely not the same person. I mean, she's a teenage prostitute who's kind of not very clued up about the world. So she was cathartic for me to write, in a sense, because there were so many elements of her personality, the way she talks, the way she looks at the world, that kind of came from my experiences at the same age, and meeting people and kind of really feeling like I was much more knowledgeable about the world. The way that a lot of teenagers do, I think. She thinks she knows it all, and then eventually she comes to realize that actually possibly she doesn't. So yeah, that's probably where Carmen came from. And Kosick, I really wanted to write a character who was a prize fighter. It's something I've always wanted to have in a book. I just find the whole idea of pit fighters and prize fighters and that kind of enslaved, forced, barbarism is fascinating. So I started looking at kind of the really old school boxes, which I did write down, and I've completely forgot the name of now, because I found some absolutely fascinating ones. Just trying to check my crib sheets, I'm like, I'll find it. So Jimmy Wilde, who was a Welsh boxer. He went, I think it was 111 victories that he had kind of in the early kind of 1910s, and he won 99 of them by knockout.
Wow.
And he's just fascinating character, because I mean, he doesn't look like how we would expect fighters today to look. There's another guy called Patrick McFarland, who is an American guy, and he never won any major titles, so he wasn't particularly well known, but his story was so fascinating about how he grew up the boxing clubs, and he kind of progressed into becoming a professional fighter. So I knew I wanted a character that was sort of like that, but I also wanted a character who was from outside of the city, someone that could bring a different perspective in.
Right.
So when I wrote Kosick, I spoke to quite a few people who have been refugees from kind of war zones and countries that are in conflict, just to make sure that I was kind of doing this justice and writing the character the right way. And I based a lot of his perspective, a lot of the way he thinks about the world, on their experiences and kind of the stories they told me.
It sounds like you put a lot of thought and a lot of layers into the characters, and I think that is always appreciated by the readers, because you're not just going to try to completely make it up whole cloth. You've actually thought about it in a way that, okay, I've built the character, now how do they respond to the people around them, as opposed to just throwing them in and seeing what happens. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I keep character profiles for all of my characters, which, to be fair, actually is probably, again, one of the slightly plotterish things I do. I have templates for even the minor characters, and it tells me things that aren't necessarily in the book, but would definitely influence the way that they would react to certain things, or the way that they would speak to people and their mannerisms. So it's good to have that just in the background, just so that you can build in those layers.
Yeah, yeah, because in the back of your mind, you know certain things, and even as you say, even if it never comes up, the reader can sometimes feel that there's more there, that there is more. That once they scratch the surface of the character, and it is that then they get that itch. They're like, oh, I want to know more about it. And you're sat there going, yeah, I know you do. You may never find out. Who knows? But it's there. They can just feel it there. I think it really helps to take the time to build the characters out and make them feel very fleshed out.
Yeah.
So you self-published We Men of Ash and Shadow. Tell me about the journey of going on that versus traditional publishing, why you chose to self-publish it.
I always knew right from the get-go that this was one that I wanted to self-publish. A lot of it was to do with the element of creative control. So I was already kind of in the process of getting cover artists and talking to editors and people that I wanted to have involved with the book quite early on. And I knew that if I were to try and go down the traditional publishing role, that elements of those choices would probably be taken away from me. I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to achieve. So, I mean, I had previously, with stuff that I'd written, kind of the books I'd written before, put out tentative feelers about, going down the traditional route, which, I think that's a great choice for some people. And I know that it's kind of the end goal for, a number of writers. But for me, I think the self-publishing industry is so huge now, and it's just such a wide platform for people to stand on. And you've got fantastic authors now coming through the self-published route. It's, in terms of quality, in terms of range, like variance, it's just, there's so much that you can do with it, and so much coming out of it. You've got you like the SPFBO. I really can't say that. I need to stop trying.
It needs a better anagram, to be honest. It's not easy to say. It's just really, really not easy to say. Yeah.
So you've got things like that shining a light on independent self-published authors. You've got your Ben Galleys and people like that who are just absolutely blowing it out of the water in terms of success and recognition. And I think for a new writer now, it's quite inspirational seeing what can be achieved through self-publishing.
Yeah, it's a very different world from when I started. It was, self-publishing wasn't what it is today. It's just grown and grown and grown over the last probably 15, 20 years, I'd say. So how did you find getting edited for the first time? Because you sent your book off to an editor and they give you feedback. How was that process for you? Because I found it awful the first time.
I mean, I've been so lucky with my editor. I mean, she's quite local to me as well. We hadn't kind of met before we spoke about the book, but we kind of run in the same circles, so we knew the same people. And where I live, it's a very close-knit creative community, so it's great because you can just find people so quickly. But she read the book and she really loved it, and she said, can we meet up and we'll discuss kind of my perspective and what I think and where I think it should go. And I was like, yeah, that's fine, we'll go. And we went to the pub, and
always good.
Went to the pub, and my husband came with me as well, because I was like, can you just come with me just in case it goes really badly and we have to leave. We got there and we sat down, and immediately she said, have you ever heard the Sam Vine's economic theory about boot buying from Terry Pratchett? And I was like, oh yeah, I know it. And she's like, yeah. She said, I read your book, and she said, and I feel like, she said, it's like walking into the disc world, but when it's like a grimdark version of it. And we ended up having this huge conversation about like Terry Pratchett, and we were quoting lines from books to each other, and eating crisps and drinking cider, and it was great. So yeah, we just absolutely clicked from the moment that I walked in. And she's fantastic because she's so brutally honest, as most editors are, but she's also really supportive. And she messaged me the other day because it's been a while since she'd heard from me. She was like, are you still alive? Are you still writing? What's going on? I was like, yeah, still writing, still going. So yeah, it's been a wonderful experience.
That's good. I know. Yeah, I think initially some people struggle, self-published and traditional published, with editors because you spend so long working on something, months and years, and then someone comes in and says, I don't like this and you should change this, and have you thought about that? And it's difficult to step back sometimes for me initially to kind of say, well, you don't know, and they've read it in like a week and you spent ages on it, and it just feels awkward.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had a few moments like that. There was one bit of kind of critique in particular that my editor gave me, where she said, you've put this kind of big reveal, this big chapter in, and it's in too early, and it needs to go more towards like the middle of the book. And I was like, no, it needs to be where it is, because if people don't know this, then they're not going to care about the character, and it's all just going to go wrong. And I kind of went away for about a week, and then after that I was like, I'll try it. So I tried it, and I moved it to where she wanted it to be, and I reread it, and I just kind of went, and then I had to ring her and just be like, no. So I think, again, if advice for new writers is just listen to your editor, because they know what they're talking about. So if you've got a good editor, then do what they say.
Yeah, it's that thing of, you pick your battles. If you read something and you strongly disagree with it and it doesn't feel right, give it a bit of time. And if it still doesn't feel right, you don't have to make it. It's the suggestions, even traditional publishing. It's not you must do this. And it's all that's the other thing. It's all designed to make the book better, to make the story better. It doesn't always feel like that.
No, that's it. It is difficult, I think, especially like you say, the first few times that you kind of experience it and you've put so much effort into this book. But yeah, at the end of the day, if you've got a good editor, and it should be a collaborative process, like you say, there should be give and take, and there's negotiations. Certainly there was stuff that my editor said, I think you should possibly get rid of this, and I was like, no, that's a non-negotiable, and she was fine with that. And it's that kind of relationship that you need to build, where you can be honest, you can be critical, and it goes both ways, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So because you self-published it, you got to work with a designer on the cover. Tell me about the cover, because it's amazing. Where did that come from? And what notes did you give to the designer, or ideas, or did you like a Pinterest board or something like that?
No, I'm really terrible with visual kind of like pin boards and things like that. So I kind of knew my cover artist. He's a guy called Luke Michael Copsey. Again, he's local to me. I knew him through kind of friends of friends and creative circles, but we hadn't really kind of interacted. And I went to a comic convention on a farm, which was just the most fantastic, surreal experience. I think one day I'm going to have to talk more about this comic convention, because
what was the comic convention?
It was literally, as you would imagine, it was kind of down the road from us. It was a farm that is, usually somewhere people take their kids on the weekend so that they can kind of feed goats and look at rabbits and things like that.
Yeah.
But they hosted a comic convention, so they've got people in cosplay and, celebrities and people dressing up in all these stalls with like graphic novels and comics. And it was amazing, walking along, through a field, and you've got cows on one side of you and like stormtroopers on the other. It's so bizarre. I think Clive Mantle was there, who was in Game of Thrones and like a whole host of other stuff. And he just walked past, and like he was on this he walked past and he was just going up to this tractor, and there was people going and having pictures with Clive Mantle next to this tractor with kind of farming machinery in the background, and he's in this huge great winter coat. Very strange. But anyway, went up on a tangent there, sorry.
That's fine. It's fine.
My cover artist was there. He was doing a stand there to promote his graphic novels and his art that he does.
Yeah.
And we kind of got chatting, and I said, I really like your stuff. Would you be interested in maybe doing a cover for me? And he was really excited to get involved. So I sent him the first 2 or 3 chapters of the book. No notes, no kind of ideas of what I wanted or anything like that. And he sent me a mock-up, and it was like somebody had reached into my brain and just pulled out this world. So yeah, it was like there was no kind of iterations, there was no kind of different covers. It was the first one that he came up with was the one that we went with. He's doing this cover for the second book as well. So I messaged him and I said, look, the second book's coming up. Are you still happy to do the cover for me? He said, yeah, I'll do it for you. So I sent him a phone screenshot of a kind of sketch that I'd done with like stick men and like little kind of boxes and things with like words in that, like, you know, dark sky here, like with an arrow, and sent that to him. And I think within about a day, he sent me back another kind of very rough, like sketched mock-up of just this cover that just blew my mind, and it was just fantastic. So I'm so fortunate to have found him. Like, he's such a talented guy.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing cover. I'll have posted a picture, people can see it. Yeah, you look at, he's local as well. That's so fortunate. You just ran into him randomly, you know, at a comic convention on the farm.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, it's fantastic as well, because if we do have things that we need to talk through, or there's kind of any kind of conflict in what we're doing, we're literally just like half an hour away from each, not even half an hour away from each other. It's probably more like about 10 minutes, to be honest. So, you know, if it wasn't for lockdown, we probably would have done all this in the pub. So
yeah, this is true. Yeah, the pub, COVID has robbed many trips to the pub. So how are you getting on with book 2? How are you finding it? You know, book 1 is done, it's out there, and now you got to start on book 2. What was that process like?
Book 2 was a really strange process for me. It wasn't at all like I was expecting, because I've been through the process of writing a first book, writing a second book, so I kind of didn't think that I would feel that different about it. I think the difference is because this one is published, it's a whole new ball game, because you're so aware now of, you know, things that people have picked up on, and, you know, the positive feedback you've had from people, the critiques, the criticisms, and you sit down to write, and kind of all of a sudden all these voices are in your head going, you know, oh, you should do this, and like you need to answer this question, and I think for me I went through a period of probably about 3 or 4 months where I really struggled with it, because, you know, like most writers, I go through these periods of like self-doubt, and kind of feeling like, people talk about imposter syndrome,
yes,
a lot, and it really kind of started to weigh down on me whether or not I could write this second book, because I was tying myself in knots trying to get all the things right that people had liked in the first book, but also trying to correct all of the things that people had said, you know, maybe they didn't like as much, or, you know, didn't work for them. And I think just ended up kind of drowning myself in this, you know, almost like this obsession of pleasing everybody, which, you know, I've come to realize obviously you can't please everybody. So I'd say the last few months it's really started to fall into place for me. I mean, the story is finished.
Right.
It is a complete book. It's been through probably 2 or 3 edits now, so we are in the final furlongs, so to speak. Hopefully I'm going to get this iteration off to my editor by the end of next week is the goal, and then hopefully that will be the end of the kind of the developmental edit stage, and we'll kind of move into then the copy edits and the, you know, sorting out the fine details and things like that. So it's getting there.
Do you have a date in mind, or is it you're just going to see where it is when it's ready and then decide?
I'm just going to see where it is, and then we'll decide. Okay. I mean, I'm hoping that my editor won't come back with too many major changes, but you know, you can never tell these things. No. So we'll have to see. And it's a lot longer as well, this one. I think the first book ran to about 102,000 words. This one's about 125,000 mark at the minute. So yeah, I've made the mistake before of trying to put out timelines and deadlines and things like that, and, you know, I'm not going to go down that route this time.
Yeah, it's ready and then you've got time to prepare and set a date in the future once it's ready, and then start planning in, you know, everything else around it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're definitely looking at, you know, kind of this year, well, you know, the next kind of several months. I just think where we are in the year then.
It's like, where September, it's nearly October. That's terrifying though.
Yeah, I was just like, wait,
I'm like, it can't be. It was summer like 2 minutes ago, and now it's nearly October. That's just absolutely scaring me to death. It'll be Christmas soon. Again,
I know. What a
I
scary
can't.
thought.
I can't.
What a scary thought. I'd love to say I will try and get it out for Christmas so that people can put it under their grimdark Christmas trees. But I just don't want to make any promises at this stage. I'd rather get it out right than get it out rushed. So.
Yes, always. Definitely. Yeah. So how many books are you planning in the series? Or, do you have that in mind now that you've finished the second one?
Do you know what? I feel now like I've actually planned a lot more than I thought I had, talking about it. I have a plan for 4 books.
Okay.
So when I first started, I had this idea in mind that I wanted to do books that would expand geographically with each installment. So we have the first book, which takes place completely centralized in the one city. Mm-hmm. The second book will be going out into the country. The third book will then expand into the world and other countries around. And then the fourth one will hopefully kind of bring it all together and tie it in. I mean, I could go on and do like the galaxy, the universe, but I think by that point I should probably stop. So yeah, 4 is the plan.
Right. Okay. It's ambitious. Yeah, a lot to think about, especially if you keep growing it every time as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've let myself move for there. So.
Do you have more points of view in the second book than the first? If it's a bit longer, or is it the same?
I mean, it's the same. I mean, points of view is something that I've become a lot more aware of as a writer as I'm going on. Naturally, you kind of try and learn and improve as you go. So, I mean, I have several POVs and kind of perspectives, but they are all the characters that people have kind of already got to know and kind of already established. So there may be some new ones in the future.
Okay,
maybe.
yeah, maybe.
There may be some plans. Some plans for that.
No spoilers. No spoilers.
I have to be really careful. I'm so bad with spoilers.
It's difficult. You're kind of thinking, what do I say? Can I say that? Can I not say that? Yeah. It's better say less. Better say less.
I think I've done so many podcasts where I think I come across as I'm really vague, or I don't kind of have ideas, and I kind of know all these things, but I just don't trust myself to talk about them without saying too much. So yeah, I have to give the political answers quite a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. We want people to read the book. We don't want them to have all the answers ahead of time. This is it. So final question, what are you reading at the moment? What are you enjoying?
Oh, okay. So I have been going through as many of the SPFBO, that sound, entrance for this year as I can. So I've just finished AJ Retka Oathbreaker. I've read P.L. Stewart, A Drowned Kingdom, Tim Hardy, Hall of Bones. Tim Hardy is my dark horse for the competition this year. I think he's one to watch. I am currently I'm about to start reading Bjorn Larson. I've started reading Why Odin Drinks, and I've also got Children ready to go as well. So I think I'm going to have to decide which one I want to carry on with, because they're both like start off really strongly. So yeah, I'm going to have to decide now.
We should probably say, for the people who don't know, what SPFBO is.
Yes. I think, I get so caught up in assuming that people know these terms and things that I forget some people don't. So yeah, it's currently ongoing. It's the competition run by Mark Lawrence, who wrote Prince Thorns, huge, famous, well-known writer. He started this blog off, the self-published fantasy blog off, for people who had bought out fantasy books, self-published, just to shine a light on the incredible talent that is out there. Absolutely fantastic, just purely for building a TBR. It's great because you can just go and just go through all the books. So yeah, there's so many big writers that have come out of that competition and gone on to big things. And even this year, there's you've got like Michael R. Fletcher, Clayton Snyder, Ben Galley, Rob Hayes. There's just so many fantastic authors in it. So yeah, go and check it out, have a look.
And like previous winners and people like Jonathan French, as you said, Ben Galley, Justin Lee Anderson, he won last year, I want to say. Is that right?
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so there's so many great books, and it's really good of Mark to do this, just to kind of show the amount of talent that is out there now, and that self-publishing is just so different from many years ago, and people have just put so much hard work into it. The books and the covers are always amazing. I'm always blown away by some of the artwork. Like,
Yeah.
It's not, it's not stock photos. Someone's gone and like painted something, and it's just amazing. I just love some of the covers. They're so cool.
Yeah, no, they are. There's just fantastic amount of talent that's in that competition. I don't envy the judges at all.
No, I'm glad I'm not a judge. I'd be like, no, I don't want to do it. It's too hard. It's too hard.
The effort they put in is fantastic. It really is. Like, just unbelievable commitments that they've got.
Yeah, you're going to end up disappointing someone, so I never want to be a judge. Don't ask me. No one asked me.
I can read one book a month, maybe, never mind, like 30 in like a couple of months. It's just,
yeah. I'm way too slow a reader. I just couldn't do it. I just could not do that.
Yeah,
I need like an 8-month lead time to catch up.
Yes, that's it. That'd be same for me.
Well, it's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you for coming on this evening, and I'll put links down below for everybody for where they can find you on social media and the book, We Men of Ash and Shadow. And wait for news for book 2 in the future. Not setting a date, but sometime in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you. I've had a great time. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Good night.